Today, here in the Kansas Dynasty on EA College Football 25, we will be revealing the college football playoff here for season number 1. It'll be interesting to see who our 12 teams are, where everybody will line up, and the most pressing question for us, if our Jayhawks end up making the playoff. Of course, we are coming off a tough loss in the Big 12 championship game against Utah, 20-17, a game that we really could have and honestly should have won. Along with our matchup, we watched every single conference championship game in the last episode. It ended up being 2 hours long. In case you missed it and would like to check it out, I will leave a card at the top right of your screen because obviously we went over a lot. Of course, the the Power 4 champions now will be automatically put into the playoff, that being Oregon, Miami, Georgia, and Utah. Presumably, those 4 teams will get first-round byes. The highest-ranked Group 5 champion will get in. It would have been Liberty, but since they lost, it'll likely be one of Tulane or Appalachian State, or maybe a surprise. And then 7 at-large spots decided by the College Football Committee. With us not winning the Big 12, we need to hope that the committee likes our resume enough to give us a spot. Along with the playoff, we'll be going over the individual awards, including the Heisman Trophy, along with all the other awards and the AllAmericans, as well as the final bowl games. Hopefully we don't end up in a bowl game, but rather a playoff game. So now it's time for the moment of truth. I am going to hit simulate, and with that, our fate will be determined. So let's see how this goes. The moment of truth. During this simulation, we would find out that Marvin Grant wins the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Week and Lawrence Arnold wins the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week. So we get both Players of the Week despite losing. The National Players of the Week were Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State, and Nick Scorton, the edge rusher out of Texas A&M. No major surprises. I don't really have a problem with either of those choices. Both of those players were absolutely incredible. I think the one guy you could have considered was the safety from Appalachian State, who didn't even win the Defensive Player of the Week in the Sun Belt, which is wild to me. So now it's time for the moment of truth, and we will start with the 12 teams in the college football playoff. Our bracket, as you can see, is currently blank, but not for long. We're going to find out the 12 teams in the playoff and what our first round matchups will be. Let's start with the number 1 overall seed. To no surprise, the Oregon Ducks. This was pretty obvious coming off of their Big Ten championship win against Michigan, the only undefeated team left in the nation, and pretty easily the favorite to win the national title. Multiple resume-building wins. They beat Michigan twice. They beat Ohio State. Dylan Gabriel, the front-runner for the Heisman Trophy. Jordan James was terrific. Evan Stewart's probably going to be a top 10 pick. Trayshawn Holden scored 19 times. And then defensively, Jordan Birch, 23.5 sacks. The current front-runner to be the number 1 pick. This is the best team in the country, the most talented team. They are number 1 for good reason. The second spot goes to the Georgia Bulldogs, the champions of the SEC. Georgia had a strong season going 11-2. They had some big wins in here. They beat Clemson. They beat Alabama. They beat Ole Miss. Now, of course, they lost to UMass in Week 13, alarmingly, but they came back strong, beating Texas A&M in the SEC Championship 17-3 in a defensive battle. Carson Beck struggled in that game and has been inconsistent throughout the year, but Beck is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in this tournament. Trevor Etienne was awesome in the SEC Championship. Dominic Lovett and London Humphreys lead a stout receiving core. And then this defense, one of, if not the most talented units in college football. Maybe not the eye-popping stats that, say, the Oregon guys have, but Micah Williams is going to be a first-rounder. Malachi Starks is going to be a first-rounder, amongst many other great players on that side of the ball. So Georgia gets the number 2 spot. The third seed in the playoff goes to the Utah Utes, the champions of the Big 12. They move up 3 spots in the rankings after beating us. Utah's played and beaten a lot of really good teams this year, including Oklahoma State, UCF in order to make the conference championship game, and then a defensive battle against us, which is rare for the Big 12. As much as Utah's offense was disappointing in the conference championship up until the fourth quarter, their defense was outstanding against that stout Kansas offense. As for the number 4 seed, again, to no surprise, the University of Miami. The Hurricanes went 11-2. Obviously, their year started off poorly. They were down 28-0 at halftime against Florida in Week 1. Nearly came back and won, and since then they've been really good, only losing once to Syracuse. Now, they barely beat NC State in the conference championship, and had they lost, I think they would have been out entirely. But they still make it in. They still get a bye. Cameron Ward has had an awesome year. Again, he's one of the best quarterbacks in this tournament, and I think his draft stock has so much to gain. If he leads Miami on a run, I definitely think he could push his way into the first round. Miami's got a lot of skill position talent and some really good players, of course, on defense as well. Marley Cook, Reuben Bain Jr., and others. So those are the 4 teams getting first-round byes. This was expected. We figured it would be these 4. We figured it would be in that order. Let's see the other conference champion, our Group 5 team. Again, it was supposed to be Liberty, but with their loss, they are knocked out of the picture. So the Group 5 representative and the number 12 seed in the playoff will be the Tulane Green Wave. This is very well-deserved and, in my opinion, the right call. Tulane with some early resume boosters, beating both Kansas State and Oklahoma early in the season. They lost a close one to a Louisiana team who turned out to be quite good. Obviously, their loss against Memphis the final week of the year was a concern, but those were thrown out the window after shutting out Rice in the conference championship. Ty Thompson, the Oregon transfer, had a phenomenal season at quarterback. Running back Mekhi Hughes is one of the best Group 5 players in the nation. They've got a great group of receivers with Shaz Preston, Yulkeith Brown, and Mario Williams. And the defense, we saw them in full display a week ago, not allowing anything against the talented Rice offense. So these first 5 teams earned their way into the playoff by winning their conference championships. As for these next 7 spots, they will be determined by the College Football Playoff Committee. The highest ranked 7 schools remaining will get these at-large positions. We'll start with the number 5 seed and the team who will be hosting Tulane in the first round of the College Football Playoff, and it's going to be the Texas Longhorns. Again, no major surprise. They were the highest ranked team who did not play in a conference championship. Texas had a strong season. They shut out Michigan at the Big House. They beat Georgia in a close game at home, with their only losses coming to Oklahoma and Texas A&M. The A&M loss really might not be a bad thing in hindsight, because now they didn't have to worry about an SEC championship. They'll get an extra week off. Quinn Ewers had a very strong season at quarterback. He leads the way, joined by sophomore running back C.J. Baxter in a really strong group of receivers. Isaiah Bond, the Alabama transfer, leads the way along with Matthew Golden and Amari Niblack. The offensive line is very strong, and the defense is too. Texas certainly will be the front runner to make it out of the first round against Tulane. The winner of that game will play against Miami in the second round at the Peach Bowl. The number 6 seed will be the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Notre Dame started the year 5-0. They beat Texas A&M, unlike the Longhorns, but they lost 2 in a row to Stanford and Georgia Tech. But after that, they figured it out. They won 5 games in a row, including a super exciting win against USC, with the winner of that game making the playoff and the loser not making it. Riley Leonard, the senior quarterback, one of the better QBs in this tournament, leads the way. They've got a solid skill position group led by running back Jadarian Price. Per usual, Notre Dame has a great front unit and a very solid defense. Xavier Watts, the All-American safety, leads the way in the back end. Next up, the number 7th seed will be the Texas A&M Aggies. Texas A&M had a really hard schedule, losing to Notre Dame early in the season, but from there they really figured things out, going on a nice win streak. They lost to LSU in Week 9, but they were able to come back, win 4 in a row with a huge resume win against Texas, following a 17-3 defeat in the SEC Championship against Georgia. The offense really struggled in that game, but they've still got a strong unit. Connor Wakeman at quarterback, Reuben Owens at running back. Noah Thomas leads the way at receiver. The strength of this team, though, is the defense, and we saw that against Georgia. Their front unit, led by potential first-rounder Nick Scorton, who had 14 sacks this year. The number 8 seed and the final team who gets to host a first-round game will be the Mustangs of Southern Methodist University. Certainly a surprise for many coming into the season. In their first year in the ACC, they knocked it out of the park. They lost to Louisville and Cal, but otherwise they were really strong. Similarly to Texas, their loss at the end of the year might really not have been a bad thing. They get an extra week off and they still get to host a first-round game. Preston Stone, the junior quarterback, leads the way. Jalen Knighton, very solid running back and a really good group of receivers. Jake Bailey and Jordan Hudson finished with nearly identical stats. Keyshawn Smith led the way in touchdowns, and of course, tight end R.J. Maryland is one of the best players on this offense. Defensively, they're really well-rounded, with Deuce Harmon at corner headlining the group. As for the number 9 seed, our Kansas Jayhawks are in the college football playoff, and we are headed to Dallas for the first round to face off against SMU. So it is official. We will be going to the playoff despite our loss in the Big 12 championship against Utah. Even though we had an easier schedule this year, this is still very well deserved. You can only play the teams that are on your schedule. And we held up against Utah, only losing by 3, and we should have won it. Obviously, our backfield might be the best in the nation, with Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal leading the way. The skill position group outside of Neal is very strong as well. Luke Grimm really broke out. Lawrence Arnold as well is a fantastic player, and of course Devin Neal is dynamic in the passing game. The offensive line is really strong, and the defense had its good and bad this year. Young and old leading the defense. Dekias Brinkley, the true freshman, with 14.5 sacks. Damani Maxson, the freshman safety linebacker hybrid, was great, and of course the seniors in the secondary with Kobe Bryant, Melo Dotson, and Marvin Grant. I am ready for the challenge against SMU. I think it's going to be a really fun matchup on the road. Curious to see if we win. And if we do, we've got Oregon at the Rose Bowl in the second round. It's nice getting some stress alleviated on our end, knowing that we're in the playoff, but we've still got 2 spots, number 10 and number 11, to determine. We'll start with the number 10 seed. Who gets Texas A&M in the first round? It'll be the Ohio State University. So the Buckeyes come in at number 10, going 9-3. They lost to Oregon, of course, early in the year in Week 7. Their big loss was late in the season against Michigan. Had they won that game, they'd be at double-digit wins. They'd be a lock to make the playoff, and they would play Oregon in the conference championship. Despite losing against the Wolverines, they still get a slot. Will Howard, the senior quarterback, really figured things out as the year went along. Travion Henderson's been hurt for most of the year, but he is healthy, pairing up with Quinshon Judkins in the backfield. True freshman Jeremiah Smith leads the receiving core along with potential first-rounder Emeka Ibuka. The defense is really strong as well, so the Buckeyes have Texas A&M, and the winner will play Georgia in the second round. That's a gauntlet little grouping there. We've got 1 spot to go, the number 11th seed, the final at-large slot, and the final team going into the 2024-25 college football playoff. Drumroll, please. It'll be the University of Michigan. So despite losing the conference championship game against Oregon, they only slide down a few spots, and they will still be going to the playoff. I like that we're not penalizing teams for losing the conference championship games, because they really shouldn't be. Obviously, it is a question of how this passing game will look. Alex Orji had a pretty strong season, but was inefficient against the Ducks. Donovan Edwards, of course, leads the run game. He's had a phenomenal season. The receiving core with Samaj Morgan and Colston Loveland. But obviously, the strength of this team is the defense. 12 sacks for Josiah Stewart, 11.5 for Mason Graham. Will Johnson in the secondary. Michigan will be playing Notre Dame in the first round, and the winner of that game will get Utah in the Sugar Bowl. I think the one school who's probably going to feel very left out is Rutgers. You had other teams like Oklahoma and Virginia Tech left behind, but they lost 3 games. Rutgers, though, went 10-2. They had a better record than Ohio State and Michigan, who play in the same conference. Now, granted, Rutgers' schedule was quite a bit easier than both of those teams, so I think that's part of the reason why Rutgers was ultimately left out. But I would understand why the Scarlet Knights fans are probably a little bit upset about this. And had Rutgers made it, I think they would have had a chance to win a game or two, with Athan Kaliakmanis and Kyle Monangai leading the way. But unfortunately for them, their run for a title this year is over, and that is what our bracket ultimately looks like. So now that we know who our 12-team playoff will be, let's look at the other awards, starting with the Heisman Trophy. And it'll be Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback from Oregon. He was the front runner going into conference championship week. He didn't have some great game against Michigan, but he played well enough, and considering Jalen Daniels really did not have that good of a game against Utah, that ultimately was the difference. With Daniels jumping Will Howard, he gets the 2 slot Howard comes in third, Trayshawn Holden in fourth, and then Kyron Drones in fifth. Dillon Gabriel did have a really good season. I don't think he should have won the award, though, because I think he is a product of the Oregon system. It helps having some really good receivers. I think a different Oregon player should have won it, that being Jordan Burch on the defensive line. We'll talk about him in a moment. Our guy, Jalen Daniels, comes in second. Even though I think Jordan Burch should have won the award, I think Jalen Daniels should have been the highest finisher amongst the quarterbacks. I think he was the most valuable player at the position, given what he's been able to do, not just as a passer, but also a rusher for us as well. Will Howard gets the third spot, Trayshawn Holden in fourth, and then Kyron Drones again in fifth. With Drones being the only non-senior here, I'd imagine he'll go into next year as the front runner, assuming he stays in school and stays at Virginia Tech, which we'll have to see. As for the other awards, Dillon Gabriel wins the Player of the Year. I think this is just an extended version of the Heisman because the top five was the exact same. The interesting thing here is, one, Jordan Burch is only in 11th. That's criminal. Secondly, Devin Neal comes in 12th. We'll dive deeper into his season shortly. The head coach of the year is Dan Lanning of Oregon, with Puma Whitlock coming in 5th. On one hand, I feel like Puma Whitlock should win it for overperforming, but on the other hand, a guy like Dan Lanning, for instance, has done such a great job at Oregon, bringing in so much talent. I get it, because that is part of the job. Dillon Gabriel wins the best quarterback. The next award we have is the best defensive player, and that, obviously, no surprise, is Jordan Burch. What an unbelievable season so far for Burch. 23.5 sacks through his first 13 games. He's gotten at least one sack in every game this year. He's not the only Oregon player at the top, with Jeffrey Bassa coming in second. Zakious Brinkley, meanwhile, gets third. We've got all upperclassmen in here, and then our true freshman gets the third spot. Very well deserved, 20 TFLs, 14.5 sacks. I do feel like he kind of hit the rookie wall where he was not as good as the year went along, but still a fantastic year and deserves all the credit he's being given with all these great defensive players, many of whom are going to be first-round picks this year. Look at the best defensive backs. Oregon gets 1, 2, 3, and 7. And then we get 4, 6, and 8. 7 of the top 8 spots are occupied by Oregon players or Kansas players. This makes my heart happy. Sko Ducks and Rock Chalk. Taisheem Judson ultimately ends up as the winner of the award, the senior safety, with his 2 starting corners, Jabbar Muhammad and Jaleel Florence, in second and third. As for us, we as well have 3 players in the top 10, and that starts with the true freshman, Damani Maxon. What a start to his Kansas career. Now, he really wasn't a defensive back. We played him at linebacker, so he really shouldn't be here, but whatever. We'll roll with it. Marvin Grant comes in 6th, a tackling machine. Over 100 total tackles this year. He always seemed to be around the football. Very smart, very instinctive player. And then Kobe Bryant comes in 8th. I would say Bryant was our most valuable defensive player throughout the year. A consistent shutdown corner who also gave us great ball production with 5 interceptions, including what should have been the clinching interception in the Big 12 championship before we ultimately lost the game. As for the best running back, Devin Neal ends up winning the award. I'm a little bit surprised on one hand that a guy like Ollie Gordon, who was such a dominant rusher, didn't win it. But I feel like the game made the right call here because of what Devin Neal also offered in the passing game. Obviously, Devin Neal was great as a traditional runner. 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns. But then as a receiver as well, pretty much 600 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns, over 100% of his yards after the catch. That's 1,800 all-purpose yards for Devin Neal. Such a key cog to the offense. I think the rest of this order is pretty bad, though. Like Ollie Gordon, for instance, how is he in 7th? He averaged 8 yards a carry on high volume. Jordan Waters, how is he in 10th? He was top 3 in rushing. Awesome game in the ACC Championship. He belonged in the top 5. Very close finish for best receiver, but it goes to Teteroa McMillan of Arizona, who not only wins this award, but will likely be a top 10 pick at the bare minimum in this year's NFL draft with over 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns. Oregon still made their mark here with Trayshawn Holden coming in second. Statistically, I think Holden was the best receiver in the country. 19 touchdowns. He scored like 40% of the time he got the ball. And I think Evan Stewart was better than both of those guys, but he was a little quiet towards the second half of the year after a dominant start. Jordan Burch wins the Lombardi, obviously. Zakious Brinkley in third. This time he finishes behind Deion Walker, the big man out of Kentucky, 6'6", 350. The Unitas Golden Arm for the top senior quarterback is again Dillon Gabriel. Why is Jalen Daniels finishing in second for every award? It's kind of depressing. Jordan Birch wins the best defensive end, with Brinkley coming in second. The best interior lineman is Tate Ratledge, the senior guard out of Georgia, who's likely to be one of, if not the highest interior offensive lineman off the board in this year's NFL draft. We had Mike Ford Jr., our left guard, in the running for much of the year, but he dropped off the list. Terrence Ferguson wins the best tight end. He might be the first player to ever win this award and not score. I feel like especially in Oregon's offense, with all the scoring they do, he would luck into one. So because of that, as much as I love my guy T-Ferg, he had no business finishing in first place whatsoever, especially considering some of the other great tight end seasons around the nation. Oregon's defensive coordinator wins the Broyles Award, with our defensive coordinator coming in 8th. Best linebacker goes to Jeffrey Bassa, another award for the Ducks. They have won like 5 or 6 at this point at least. Bassa's a coverage linebacker who was used as a blitz threat this year, finishing with 14 sacks, tied for second in the nation, only behind his teammate, Jordan Birch. As for the other awards here at the end, we'll start with the best center. That ended up going to Parker Brailsford, the redshirt sophomore out of the University of Alabama. No Kansas players here on these past few lists. Bryce Foster, our starting center, did have a great year, though. I think he should have gotten there. Graham Nicholson of Alabama wins the Lou Groza Award as the top kicker. The best punter goes to Mark Vassett of Colorado. I don't really want to be on the best punter list because that means we're punting a lot. As for the final award, the best returner, Le'Veon Moss, the junior running back out of Texas A&M. So those are the individual awards around the nation. Now let's take a look at the All-Americans, and we get quite the honor here with the first team. Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal on the All-NCAA first team. That's really cool. DJ Giddens is the other running back, so the Kansas and Kansas State rivalry there being shown at the top. No other players make the list for us. As for the second team, the Ollie Gordon erasure has to be discussed here. Also, no Dillon Gabriel, interestingly, despite him winning the Heisman Trophy. We ended up with nobody on defense, which is a little odd, considering we had 3 guys in the top 8 for best DB. Here is the all-freshman team as well. We ended up with nobody, which is a little bit odd, because Dekias Brinkley had 14 sacks, and Damani Maxon had like 85 tackles. Maxon was 4th for best defensive back. Brinkley was 3rd for best defensive player of the year, not just amongst freshmen, but amongst everybody. How do they not make the all-freshman team when they were the best players at their position in the entire country? What are we doing? As for all-conference, Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal make it, obviously. Only one player on defense, though, that being Kobe Bryant. I don't know how we can have guys so high in the awards not become All-Americans. It doesn't make sense. On the second team, Michael Ford Jr. makes it at left guard. I don't see how there were 6 better receivers than Luke Grimm. That makes no sense to me. And then defensively, we get Mello Dotson and Marvin Grant, but no Damani Maxon and no Dekias Brinkley again. As for the Big 12 freshman team, there's no way they don't make it, right? Well, the good news is that Damani Maxon is on this team, but Dekias Brinkley, who had 14 sacks, and again finished in the top 3 for every major defensive national award, doesn't even make all-conference freshman team. Make it make sense. Here's a look at all the bowl games, some interesting matchups. NC State in the Fenway Bowl against East Carolina. To think they were a minute away from the playoff, and now they play East Carolina. I think Louisiana and Liberty could be a fun matchup. That's going to be an interesting game. Toledo Old Dominion could be kind of fun as well. Clemson and North Texas, I think that could be an interesting game. Alabama versus Arizona, 2 disappointing teams battling it out in the Texas Bowl. Our rivals Kansas State will play against Memphis in the Liberty Bowl. The Alamo Bowl should be a fun game, Rutgers and Oklahoma State. Virginia Tech misses out on the playoff, and their reward is they get Cincinnati in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. At least they get to see that cool mascot. And then, similarly, Oklahoma barely misses out on the playoff, and they get to play Western Kentucky in the Citrus Bowl. But it's the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, I believe. So that means the winner of the game's MVP gets, like, the hotel room with Cheez-Its, right? Isn't that what they did last year? Anyway, that'll wrap up the episode. Next time around, we've got the first round of the college football playoff. Ohio State, Texas A&M, Michigan, Notre Dame, Tulane, Texas, and of course, Kansas against SMU. Should be a fun one. Hope you guys are ready for that. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.